now. So a very warm welcome to 2023. You are watching the Change Conversations, and after an extraordinary year of unprecedented changes in UK history, the government, the royal family, that book that everyone's talking about, months spent grappling with a crisis, only to find that we're moving into another one. What now for the third sector is really the big question that we'll be asking today. So for anyone who is joining us for the first time, a very warm welcome. Change Conversation is a series of events that we've been running for charities and not-for-profits, designed to provide much needed inspiration and stimulation for the sector, because we believe real change begins with a great conversation. So we're hoping to have one of those today. And what a fantastic lineup we've got for you. I never know what really happens when you put four CEOs together, so I'm just going to go with the conversation and see what happens. But today's event is all about 2023, where we are now from the point of view of our fantastic panel, some of the big trends that might be happening over the next 12 months that you perhaps can take inspiration from, what's keeping our panelists awake at night. This is the thing that they'll be talking about also, and what positive things can we look forward to, because we all need a little bit of positivity, don't we? We are the Good Agency. We are a strategy and creative agency, and we're all about doing the good stuff, and we will only work with clients like charities and businesses who are primed for purpose, who really want to do good in the world. And today I'm joined by a fantastic lineup of panelists, each with a very unique point of view and voice, and a different style of leadership representing different causes in the sector. So allow me to introduce this fantastic panel in no particular order. So firstly, Dr. Sarah Hughes, who is the CEO of Mind. A very warm welcome, Sarah. It's such a pleasure to have you. Sarah joined Mind after 30 years of working in leadership and advocacy roles in mental health and criminal justice. She initially trained as a social worker and has headed up the Centre for Mental Health for the last 5 years, and also holds a number of board roles, including one on the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Integrated Care Board and on the Football Association Inclusive Advisory Board. Bit of a mouthful, that. She's also a trustee of the International Initiative for Mental Health Leadership. So a very warm welcome. Next, we have Alison Garnham, who is the CEO of Child Poverty Action Group. Very warm welcome to you, Alison. Alison became the chief executive in September 2010, and throughout her career, she has worked for a number of women's organisations and local voluntary sector organisations. Not only does she lead those organisations, but she writes extensively about child support legislation, lone parenthood, and child poverty. So really fascinating to explore your point of view today. A very warm welcome. Next, we have Lindsay McDonald, who is the CEO of Magic Breakfast. Welcome, Lindsay. Officially joining in November 2021 from the youth employment charity Street League, where she worked since 2014 as their co-CEO. She also co-founded the Homeless FA, the National Homeless Football Charity, and she's passionate about fighting social injustice and poverty so that people can thrive. She's also the chair of Well Grounded, vice chair of DataKind, and sits on the board of the Sport for Development Coalition. So very busy woman. Very warm welcome, Lindsay. And last but not least, we welcome Mark Russell, who is the CEO of the Children's Society. It's a post he's held since 2019. He has additionally served as a lay member of the General Synod of the Church of England and of the Archbishops' Council, both from 2005 to 11 and from 2015 to 19. He was previously a local preacher in the Methodist Church in Ireland and was a reader in the Church of England. He has also been a CEO of social justice charities since 2006 and has extensive experience of leading organisations through transformation and change. So really looking forward to hearing your words of wisdom today, Mark. Thank you very much for joining us. So just a little quick bit of housekeeping before we launch into a great conversation. We are recording this session. We will make it available to anyone who would like to receive a copy. All you have to do is send us an email at hello@goodagency.co.uk and we will be sure to respond to you. Any comments and questions, pop them in the chat. I can't promise that I'll get through all of them, but I'll do my very best. And at the end, we'll allocate 10, maybe 15 minutes and just run through some of those, and our panelists can talk directly to your questions. But now let's have a great conversation. 4 CEOs, very different CEOs, representing organizations at the very forefront of some of society's most pertinent issues: children, mental health, poverty, social justice, different sectors, different disciplines, different causes. But maybe there's a red thread that runs throughout the conversation today. So I would love to start the conversation with some personal reflections, because I think that's always a nice way to start. What the last 12 months has really been like for you personally, leading an organization and your role as a leader. What's the biggest thing that you've learned that's now shaping your point of view for the year ahead? And I'm going to ask that question to Sarah.
Gosh, it's always hard to go first, isn't it? Because it's such a great question. And I think it's really important to acknowledge first that there'll be many people that will be watching and tuning into this that will have experienced huge personal and professional challenges over the last year. And so I always start anything that I say with a deep, heartfelt solidarity with everybody, because, you know, this is a very, very tricky time. And so things that we're talking about today are very real. They're not abstract kind of ideas or thoughts. These are people's lives. So I think I just want to say that. I think the last 12 months have been, it's almost even hard to articulate, right? I mean, all of us in this room probably kind of, there have been days when we've sat there and it's almost like we're in the Matrix. This can't be quite right. And for most of us who've worked in the sector for a long time, you know, we've had hard times before. You know, it's not an easy ride to work with people who are, you know, who are not experiencing life as they should for all sorts of reasons. So there are always challenges to this experience. But the last 3 years, the last 12 months have been on another level of chaos, fear, hopelessness, urgency, lack of kind of knowing what to do. And so all of these things kind of culminating in where we are at now. And there's no doubt the biggest thing that I learned just from a leadership perspective was the importance of really talking, communicating to teams and to work really closely with people that are working alongside you, because actually co-producing solutions was the only way. So that was the biggest learning, I guess, for me personally, and this is connected to what's going on in the outside world, is very much about where charities sit now in relation to all of this stuff, policy, the division in, you know, communities, really tricky kind of hostile decision making around various policies that affect the people that we care about the most. And so trying to deal with that in a way that is going to lead to some positive outcomes is really challenging in a way that I don't know any of us have the answer to. And so, you know, there are, for me, the challenges around leadership are not only about leading the charity, but leading with purpose. And so my kind of feminist leadership approach has come to the fore probably more now than it ever has done. And you know, I can talk more about feminist leadership, but I'm sure we can come back to that. But I mean, learn lots.
I love what you say, because actually it has been a great era of listening and collaboration, isn't it? Because there are so many solutions that are coming up now. This is actually a very creative time. And definitely a time for collaboration. Mark, I'd love to get your point of view. So over to you.
Thank you. I had a very unusual experience on my first day back to work in January, which was I woke up feeling anxious. And I woke up feeling anxious. I woke up with a knot in my stomach, and I woke up feeling a bit scared, frankly. And that is not the way my body reacts when I come back to work after a holiday. Normally I'm chomping at the bit and dying to get stuck in. And it really surprised me. And it took me till about lunchtime to work out why I felt like that. And I felt like that because I was 6 months into this job before the pandemic hit. And then literally since then, it's been crisis after crisis after crisis. On my first day back in January, I thought, oh my God, what can 2024 throw at us that the other, sorry, 2023 throw at us that the other years haven't thrown already? And I remember thinking, gosh, how am I going to handle that? And then my first meeting was a Zoom call, and there was about 20 people on the screen. And suddenly I realized I love these people. I think these people are fantastic. I've worked with the most extraordinary, talented, gifted, brilliant, committed, passionate people. I'm not sure what this year's going to hold, but I couldn't ask for a better bunch of people to do this year with. So I think it's important to say that all of us throughout society have had the most unprecedented number of years. And I think I've been saying to the Children's Society a number of themes for this year ahead. And one of them is how we build our resilience. Because actually, I think arguably we took a lot of time thinking about mental health and resilience in the first year of the pandemic. I think we may need to be more intentional about helping our teams and ourselves look after our mental health and resilience in this year than in the previous ones. And also the power of kindness, and to never really, before you press send on a grumpy email, you don't know what's going on in the life of the person on the end of that email. And actually, life is hard right now for so many people. And as I look back over the last year, particularly as a charity that works with some of the most disadvantaged young people in the country, life got too hard for too many children. Far too many families struggling to put heat in the radiator and food in their table. And as I look back over this last year and see the chaos in the public square, that every time I wrote a letter to a minister welcoming them to their job, I literally had to write another letter about a fortnight later to another one, welcoming them to the same job. And actually, my learning through this last year has been that with all of the changes going on around us, our job as an organization is to keep our eyes clearly focused on our mission. And our mission as an organization is clear. Children's lives have been getting harder and harder and harder for the last 15 years, according to the research our team have done. And we're determined by 2030, children's lives are going to get better. And children are going to be more happy and more resilient and more hopeful and more confident. So my big learning is the power of keeping our eyes on our North Star, our mission, our purpose, our cause. And the other reflection I have is actually, and we'll talk about the cost of living crisis, I'm sure, but I have felt deeply for my own team and how, it's weighed heavily on me, the impact of the cost of living crisis on the team who I work with, on their families, on their, weekly outgoings. And also the fact that, for the first time in ages, our team are now providing like food parcels for children that we serve, which we've never done before. So the big learning for me is the power of the North Star to keep us focused on what we're for, with all of the chaos around us, and also the importance of kindness and building our resilience.
Yeah, I love that. And very similar to what Sarah's saying, which is all about the purpose and reconnecting to your purpose. Alison, over to you. Your reflections, please.
It's interesting. I think it's an outbreak of sort of shared experience already. So shortly into this event, I'll share with Mark how the last few years has made it really clear what a fantastic team that we have in the organisation. And actually, I think I've spent more time in the last few years thinking about staff well-being than before, partly because of the COVID lockdown and having to think about how to create sort of team cohesion and have social events for people so people don't get isolated. So well-being of staff has been a huge theme really for the last year or so. But I mean, I have to kind of reflect most of all on what's been happening to low-income families with children, because it's just been devastating. We know we went into the lockdown spending something like 42 billion a year less on social security than we did back in 2010. It's devastating what happened to family incomes. No wonder we've seen the growth of food banks. We produce a report every year called The Cost of a Child, which no one's surprised to know is a lot. £160,000 for a couple, £200,000 to the age of 18 on a very minimum budget to bring up a child. But we've seen the biggest deterioration in living standards for families since the first report we produced 10 years ago, which is unbelievable. Kind of, first example, if you like, of just how devastating this cost of living crisis has been, hot on the heels of the COVID. crisis. But one of the really positive points this year was the way the sector worked together to get the benefit up rating. Because, you know, we're not always great at working together, but we really did over the last year. Everyone singing from the same hymn sheet. I mean, this is only the 4th time benefits have been uprated in the last 13 years. So it's a pretty amazing achievement. It ought to be standard. But of course, we had to do a lot of work to achieve it. So that's something that I'll always reflect on about this year. And also positive things happening in other parts of the country. So in Scotland, the Scottish Child Payment, in Wales and Scotland, rolling out universal free school meals in primary, different sort of time schedules and so on. But that sort of stuff going on is kind of gives you a bit of hope that there's really good progress being made. We were lucky at the beginning of this year to get some financial support through the Guardian appeal, and that sort of set us off in a much better place than we'd been before. So really mixed bag this year, you know, some real achievements, but also lots of pressures and you know, staff to look after.
Yeah, it does feel like it's moving in the right direction, but many positive things are happening, and certainly collaboration and communication. Finally, we're getting better at it.
Yes.
Lindsay, please.
I feel as though I should just say ditto, because I think everything that's been said absolutely, you know, resonates. And Mark, I share that kind of day one experience, and just that real check-in with myself of thinking, I'm always so excited and so kind of, you know, thinking ahead to what's happening in the year ahead, and almost avoiding that to some extent because you just didn't want to think or imagine what might come next. I guess looking back on 2022, the word that comes to mind is learning. Obviously, a new role for me, a new sector, a new space, and really, I suppose, a new world for all of us. And navigating that, you know, joining Magic Breakfast. I think what struck me most, and one of the things going back to that point around kind of North Star and purpose, is when I applied for the role, so that was back in kind of July 2021, all of the recruitment bump was talking about the fact that there were 1.7 million children in the UK at risk of hunger. Then when I joined, it was 2.1 million. And October of this year, it was 4 million. And we're waiting for new numbers to come out from Food Foundation in the coming weeks. And I anticipate that will be higher again. And we're seeing, you know, just the velocity of this, you know, absolute social crisis and catastrophe happening. But I'm also, and something I've been really keen to keep at the front of my mind through the last year, is not letting us get to the point of thinking that it's a cost of living crisis, it's happening today and things were great beforehand, because that will leave too many children behind and too many families behind. So keeping that view on, you know, it's a marathon, not a sprint. How do we navigate the here and now? But I think my role in particular, making sure that we, as we review and refresh our strategy, looking ahead, how do we make sure, to your point, Mark, that in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, things are genuinely better? And, you know, as Alison, you were saying, how do we take the great learning and examples and case studies we're seeing, you know, north of the border, west of the border, and then also some, you know, great local authorities, combined authority activity in England as well that can be celebrated. So I think, you know, absolutely recognise and agree with the point around people as well. And something, I don't know when in 22 it was, but that realization, that really kind of gut-wrenching realization of this is going to be worse than the pandemic. And that was really hard. And just recognizing from an organizational perspective, and you know, we were talking, I think, at a Good Agency panel event back in May, we were just starting to talk about the cost of living, kind of rising costs. And I've referenced it a few times, actually. That was almost the, you know, incredibly the start of that conversation, and how far that's already kind of moved on. And, you know, the impact of that, what we've seen, you know, we've had 19% increase in our costs in just the last 12 months. So it's 19% more expensive to help, you know, give a breakfast to a child or a young person, or to advocate for that right for good. And, you know, how do we organizationally kind of become even more efficient and even more productive, when we all know that charities and people in charities are incredibly productive, incredibly passionate, go above and beyond every single day? And how do we get the balance right, I suppose, as leaders, to not I don't know if it's quite the right word, but genuinely, how do we not exploit that passion and that commitment? And you know, how do we make sure that we do ensure that it's that kind of marathon, not a sprint? We've got a long year ahead of us. We have a long rest of the decade ahead of us, I think, as a sector, but there's lots of progress that can be seen happening if we look back and reflect on that. And I do have, you know, measured optimism and hope around, you know, the point being collaboration being more readily picked up as an option. You know, it's not the kind of thing of last resort or something that somebody picks up when there's a funding pot that encourages collaboration. It is genuinely understood. We can't do this alone. You know, things like the benefits uplift were such a collective sector-wide, you know, piece of work. And I was saying to Alison before we came onto this panel, our organizations collaborated last year on the kind of, you know, cost of a school day, and thinking about, we could bring the information around breakfast, but with CPAG support we were also able to look at after school clubs and give a much more holistic package and view to policymakers, decision makers, other organizations about the genuine kind of wraparound care and support to a more holistic supported school day for children and young people. So yeah, learning is the is the key takeaway for me from the last year.
Absolutely, and great humility in that, I think, with the learning, you know, the constant need to understand that actually solutions can come from many different areas, and also cross sectors too, and cross causes. So we've started to talk about the cost of living crisis, and I think we can't really get away from it. But what I have found very interesting is that different organizations are experiencing the crisis in a completely different way. Some organizations we've spoken to have been heavily impacted and feel like they're on their knees, and some organizations haven't quite seen any change to income. So through the lens of your own experience and your own organization, I think it'd be good to just share how the crisis has impacted you and your teams and how you might be adapting. So I'd love to ask that question to Sarah.
Thank you. And I think we've started to talk about it, but I mean, there are kind of layers upon layers in terms of impact. So we think about the impact on our beneficiaries, just the profound life shock. So although I think I agree with Lindsay, you know, this poverty is not a new phenomenon, and systemic pressure in response to that is not a new phenomenon. But I think the level of acuity is new, and our lack of ability to respond. So the impact on our beneficiaries is profound. We know that, you know, if you experience poverty, you are absolutely more likely to have a mental health problem. You are absolutely more likely to have a physical health problem. And so all of these comorbidities come together. And so we're facing the challenge of our lifetime in response to not only the experience people are having today, but the impact that they're having, that this will have on the course of their lives. You know, so if, you know, people experience 5 years worth of poverty through childhood, that can't be fixed with a single intervention. So really thinking about that, thinking about the impact on our staff, you know, who not only are doing that, supporting people in that situation, but are often in similar situations themselves in terms of their own financial struggles. So again, you know, there is an accumulative impact here. You know, I don't know that the country has really quite come to terms with the impact of the pandemic, the psychological, deep psychological trauma that is collective, that we've all experienced along a spectrum of need, that we've got a workforce that is burnt out in many respects. They're holding competing priorities, colliding with their own. We've got rising costs. So as organisations, our ability to support staff starts to ebb and flow, right? So, you know, if we can't pay them in accordance with inflation, you know, I mean, that I don't know any chief executive at the moment who is really not struggling with this idea of how do we properly look after our staff financially in this fiscal chaos. I think, you know, how do we make sure that their well-being needs are really tended to? But, you know, it's one thing to say we're going to create some reflective and safe spaces for you, but actually if they can't pay their rent, you know, how much that reflective space is going to help, I don't know. So there are all these kind of complexities that I think we're facing now in relation to the cost of living. And I think that It's our job, absolutely, to hold on to hope where all hope is lost. It's my mantra. I've been saying this for 30 years that I've worked in the sector and believe it truly. But we also have to have this notion of realism. And these are urgent priorities for now, but, you know, they are going to take a decade to resolve. And this issue of, you know, there are pockets of really great work and interventions. We do have a struggle to scale them up. And fundamentally, I guess I'm a reformist in a way, because we've got a lot of stuff that is happening because we haven't got our prevention and intervention in communities right. And so we're constantly at the urgent crisis end of the spectrum when we have it in our gift to do this stuff that actually means we're creating the conditions for good physical and mental health. And we're making choices, I think political choices and decisions around policy that are not helping us to do that. This is not party political, because actually, you know, this is about policy that's probably been accumulating for 20 years. But we need to see an absolute shift in the mindset of about poverty and the cost of living crisis, because I think at the moment it's a very binary view. And we need to overcome it somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I know maybe a couple of people have raised their hands, but we won't be taking direct questions. So if you want to, just anyone in the audience want to put your questions in the chat, do that. But chiming to your point about staff feeling quite burnt out, Damien writes, the fact colleagues are burnt out with demand skyrocketing and income falling, the anxiety factor in organisations is palpable, and that is even before consideration of how we afford our own bills and cost of living difficulties. So the year ahead dread is something I've heard from many fundraising leaders right now. Sickness levels are already on track to exceed pre-pandemic levels. So absolutely, people are feeling it across the board. Alison, your reflections, please.
So I nearly busted in what Sarah was saying just now, because it's really true. But I don't think we've recovered from the pandemic yet. I think we're in a kind of PTSD situation. You know, we haven't properly processed what on earth all that was about and why we're all sitting at home and don't see anybody anymore. I mean, there's so many more developments of what took place and the development changes that took place that still need to happen before we kind of really know where we're going to land, I think. I just put a thing in the chat about charity fundraising in schools, because Lindsay mentioned our Cost of the School Day programme, where we've been talking to thousands of children and teachers and parents in schools about the extra costs that families face. You know, everything, you know, we know about trips and uniforms and food, but it's also school equipment and being punished if you can't do your work online and stuff like this. And one of the things that affects families is charity fundraising that, you know, the families have told us about. And so we put together this guide of things you can do that don't mean that low-income families end up having to cough up. So anyway, I just like to mention that. In terms of the question, I mean, we're kind of fortunate that we have got a mixed bag of income, you know. So we have fundraised income, we have our own self-generated income from our mission, you know. So we produced information for the sector on how to advise on benefits and social security law and so on, which develops an income from training and publications and so on. So that mixed bag, I think, has helped to cushion us a bit during this really difficult time. Lots of foundations have really stepped up as well, offering extra costs. And at the moment, some of them are offering some enhanced help towards increasing salaries, for example, although of course that doesn't apply to all funders. And so that can be a real problem when you've got really long-term funding and it's not going to increase, even though our costs are increasing, including salary costs. And we have noticed in fundraising, for example, a fall off in direct debits, so more direct debits being cancelled. We did what some people might think is a bit of an odd thing. We offered to give people a payments holiday. We did it twice, once in the lockdown and then once subsequently. So we did it proactively, so they could take off as many months as they wanted to. But the results were really interesting. They were really grateful. People who wanted to did take a holiday. We made it as easy for them as possible, simple button to click. But surprisingly, other donors increased what they were paying. We ended up with no net loss.
Amazing.
That was quite interesting, actually, as an experience. And people really reacted positively to it, because I think they thought that we were kind of realizing that it's tough out there for a lot of people. So yeah, sort of mixed experience of fundraising on that front.
Thank you. And Mark, over to you.
Thank you. I mean, agreeing with so much that's being said, and I think, you know, my concerns for our team around cost of living crisis, I think our team are like all organizations, are tired. I think people's resilience has had a huge battering over the last number of years. You know, we have quite a young team in our London office. You know, the price of, you know, the level of rent has gone up extortionately. One of the nice things about the new world we're in now is that we can go back into the office and I can wander around and talk to people. I mean, I think if I just wanted to drop in on some people, I would have been terrified if suddenly the chief exec wanted to talk to you. I think, oh my goodness, what have I done? So whereas at least I can wander around now and ask people. I spoke to one member of our team the other day whose rent has gone up by £1,000 a month. You're going, that's just, how on earth do you handle that? You know, and at the same time, I'm also concerned about our practitioners who are working with, you know, 50,000 young people around the country, because they're seeing the impact of children being hungry. They're seeing the impact of children anxious about their parents. We did a survey before Christmas and found 87% of families were deeply concerned about the cost of living crisis in the year ahead. You know, so children absorb their parents' anxiety and their parents' worry. So I'm worried about families on the edge. I'm worried about our team through all of this. Obviously, as the year ahead, like all organizations, there's a recruitment challenge going on and making sure that we are able to recruit the right people. We're going to have to think, you know, carefully about our pay and reward through the year ahead. And also, I'm really concerned as well about the debt time bomb that a lot of families are going to be facing over the course of the next number of months. Now, at the moment, we're very fortunate. We've got a large sort of diversification of income streams, so we're not wholly dependent on one. We get a number of you know, we run a number of projects for local authorities and other commissioners who provide us with restricted income. And we have, you know, 140,000 supporters who are generous. And at the moment, we're seeing our supporters are holding up, which is really encouraging and shows the commitment to the vision and the commitment to what we do. And then we've had about a third of our income comes from our retail arm. So we've got about 110 shops around the country, and do check out where your nearest one is and support us. And at the moment, our retail income is doing really well. And partly that's because when the economy is in a more difficult place, you'll find charity retail does better. But also we're seeing a number of people deliberately choosing, particularly younger people, choosing to shop in a charity shop for environmental and sustainability reasons. So at the moment, we're obviously monitoring our income really carefully, and we're in the middle of budget season like everybody else. But at the moment, I am unbelievably grateful to the extraordinary number of people who support us sacrificially and generously, month in, month out. And, you know, one of the most important parts of my job is our supporter care team will send me stuff about, you know, to write to donors or call them or sometimes go see them. And we're also very fortunate. We've got about 10,000 volunteers. And I signed 3 certificates last week for 3 volunteers, each of whom have given 50 years to the Children's Society, which is extraordinary, you know, extraordinary. And it's that level of, and sometimes, you know, it's very easy to get downbeat about society and we, you know, and what's going on. I believe inherently people are good. And I believe inherently people want to live in a fairer, more just, decent society. And I think people desperately want to do all that they can, whether it's with their time, with their money, or with their voice, to fight for a better world. And one of the things that we did over the last couple of years, which I'm incredibly proud of, is we led a campaign that saw the law change on school uniform, which now means that school uniform is cheaper for every child in this country. And I'm really grateful to Alison and her team at the Child Poverty Action Group, because together we produced resources for families and for schools to ensure that we can bring the cost of the school day down and help families at this tough time. So a number of years ago, it's interesting, Sarah talked about feminist leadership earlier. A number of years ago, I read an article by Rebecca Solnit, who's one of my favorite writers, a feminist writer. And she said, optimists and pessimists have one thing in common. They both believe you don't have to do anything at all. The pessimist doesn't do anything because the world will always get worse, and the optimist doesn't because the world will always get better. Solnit argues the world is only ever changed by hope-filled people who dare to believe that their voices, their actions, their words, their behavior, their choices can build a better world. And I'm honored to be part of a movement with my friends on this screen here and loads of other charities who are filled with hope that despite the challenges, despite all that's going on, we can build a fairer world, particularly for families and for children.
Love that,
I
Mark.
was introduced to a really interesting term recently called co-hoping. We need to hope together. So I thought that was great.
Wonderful concept. Yeah, love that. Co-hoping. I might steal that. Lindsay, over to you.
I think, going back to what Sarah said at the beginning in terms of actually, I think there's a real opportunity and, a need ultimately for reform. And I hope that we have radical reform because, to the point earlier about collaboration and solutions will come from unusual places. I think that is, if we think about where we are as a society, ultimately, we've not found the solutions yet. And it will only come through, new and unusual and radical ways of thinking and working together, bringing different groups together, that we will actually see and achieve that progress. And I think, the drive and the reflecting on what's being achieved day in, day out by, our team members, our volunteers, for Magic Breakfast, we absolutely rely upon teachers and school staff to deliver the breakfast so we can get the food to them, we can provide them with the support around how to make it hunger focused, stigma and barrier free. But ultimately, we rely on another group of very tired, overstretched individuals in the public sector as well. And, as an organization, I suppose Magic Breakfast, similar to what's been talked about here, we have quite a diverse set of income. So that's been, positive for us. I think as well, there is, a lack of acceptance that society should be like this. So, we had incredible examples of people when somebody was prime minister and had announced that there was going to be essentially that kind of, rebate on taxes and gas allowances. And we had individuals writing to us and saying, I will be donating mine to Magic Breakfast, or I will be donating mine to you and others. I don't need this, bumper payment or this support package from government. Others need it more. And so there's a people-led, redistribution of power and wealth that's happening in pockets that I think as a sector we can really harness and capitalize on. There was a genuine kind of coming together and real community feel, I think, at times in COVID. The building I live in didn't have a WhatsApp group before the pandemic. Now we do. Some might say we shouldn't anymore, but we are closer together. We are a greater community than we were a few years ago. And I think the same is possible again, that these kind of real challenges that we're facing and others are facing will push things, to really change and to, hopefully transform. And going back to that point around staying true to the North Star, if as charities, we maintain that long-term focus and we don't allow ourselves to be, pulled into too many of the reactive crisis elements. And, going back to what I was saying, that's where I worry, I suppose, is that the cost of living crisis could create a reaction, creates opportunities, people stepping in, wanting to help, and, what can we do today? And there is a lot to be done today, but we also want to make sure that we're, making a better future and a stronger future, and one that's, considering things. There was a mention earlier about an environmental charity. Let's not lose sight of the climate emergency. It will be of very little benefit that we feed children and young people today and equip them with wonderful educations if the planet has, burned to a crisp by the time they properly inherit it. So I think that's my real, hope and aspiration, is that collectively, and I think the charity sector does this, we stay focused on the future, which is thinking about children and young people, and also thinking about the long-term, really purpose-led actions and decisions today, and not, getting into that kind of reactive or crisis space.
So let's talk about a few of the trends that you think we might be seeing this year, that you're certainly keeping your eye out on, and something that you might be considering as you're producing strategies and plans and all the rest of it. What do you think that might be? What do you think we as a sector should look out for and might be able to learn from this year? Sarah, I'm going to ask you this question.
So I think it's leading on from Lindsay's point, really, which is this growth of collaboration, these really taking up the opportunities to push through some of the changes we want to see. So I do think that so it's this thing, we're either at a tipping point or a turning point. And I think that if we as a sector work closely together, we'll be at a turning point and able to really see some shifts. I think the things that will continue to hold that back will be the funding landscape, the challenges in relation to what it takes to make partnership work. So all of those still exist, but I think that will be a trend. All of those radical partnerships with both, you know, social enterprise, charities, commercial organisations, I think all of that is happening in a way that I think hasn't happened before, to different outcomes that and outcomes that I can support. I think that I'm not persuaded that we're going to see any political stability this year. I think that will continue. And so I think we're going to also see new ways of influencing policy change. So the way that we use our public facing roles to garner support for our campaigns, I think that's going to see a bit of a shift, because, you know, the traditional ways of influencing policy have died a bit of a death. And I think that we really need to rethink our relationship with government. How do we as charity, you know, we're already in the middle of a culture, I don't particularly like that term, but I think it reflects some of the challenges that we are experiencing in relation to our role in lobbying, our role in, you know, campaigning, and also all of that kind of stuff. I think we're going to have to, as a sector, really confront some of that, because that is directly impacting our ability to realise our strategic ambitions and to ultimately help the people that need it most. So for me, that's a challenge that I'd like to see as part of the key collaboration across different parts of this sector, but others. And then finally, I think that, you know, I'm in a room with children and young people experts, and I think that the role of children and young people's organisations in really being anchor, you know, being those anchors to accelerating and amplifying children and young people and being able to really affect their own change, to really, you know, be part of that co-creation, that opportunity to see a new vision. I think that this is where we're going to see the children and young people's charities really kind of step into a sector leadership function. So over the years, you know, we've had moments of mental health. We've had mental health organisations, of course, step forward and say, right, we on behalf of the sector will, you know, really lead this charge. Although mental health, you know, feeds across all of our organisations. So I think we're going to see children and young people's, you know, really work at the centre of things, and I'm all for that.
Fantastic. Mark, that question for you.
Thank you so much. I'm really grateful for what Sarah's just said. I think as we look ahead, I think the power of partnership and collaboration is going to be more and more important. And I think I've always believed in my heart that social change happens when leaders don't care who takes the credit. And that means we're going to have to be more generous as leaders and more sacrificial as leaders, and not be so much thinking about ourselves all the time. So I think partnership and collaboration is going to be critical. We're going to be, clearly in this year, we're going to be on the downward slide towards a general election. And I think there's going to be a real moment for us all, if we pull together and if we speak with one voice, to influence the manifestos of each political parties going into that election. I think the year ahead is going to require us to be more innovative and more creative, just building on Sarah's point. So for us as an organisation, what does that mean to co-design solutions with young people? What's it mean to promote young people's voice? What's it mean to enable young people? I often say we've got young people on our board, and they're extraordinary. I often say to them, what we need to do more of is just almost see the Children's Society like a big microphone with a big voice, and give that microphone to young people, allow them to speak up and speak out for the issues that they're passionate about. And we work with young people to try and create those solutions, but we're going to need to do that, I think, even more. And I think as well, as families struggle financially, and as people desperately would want to support us financially, but perhaps are struggling to pay their bills and think, well, actually, I can't afford that direct debit anymore. We're going to have to find new and creative ways to engage people to be part of our journey and part of our movement for change. And not to think that just because they're not able to give us money this month, that they can't be part of that. So we're going to have to think creatively about that. And actually, the reality is, as a leader of a children's charity, children are 20% of this country, but they're 100% of the future. And we have got to do better by children in this country. And the Children's Society's Good Child Report has shown for 15 years that children's well-being in this country is going down year after year after year. Children are less happy, they're less confident, they're less resilient, and they're more frightened about the future. And that can't be right. You know, we need to press our government to have a strategy for what's it mean to be a child in 21st century post-COVID Britain? What's it mean for every child to flourish? What's it mean to have a society where every child can be the best that they can be? You know, we've seen the government take 2 billion out of children's services in the last 10 years. We've seen early help cut by a half. And we know we have got a big job ahead of us. But I know in our sector, there are solutions, not just shouting at the problem, that we have creativity and energy. And actually, we've got strong relationships with politicians across the political spectrum, of, you know, who people in both major political parties who want to see change, and we've got to work with them to make that happen.
Fantastic. Russ, thanks for your question. We're going to come to your question at the end because we have a journalist question about lobbying, and lobbying comes up a lot. Actually, we've had a panel before where some chief executives have talked about the difficulty of lobbying the government and the skills that actually are deficient within the charity sector to be able to hold those conversations at the table. Lindsay, your reflections on the year ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the things I almost want to open with is I don't think trends is necessarily the word or the thinking we should have in mind. And that's ultimately the overarching trend. You know, we've talked quite a lot in our leadership team about the VUCA environment, you know, increased volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, and how do we think about things with that in mind? So the kind of classic 5-year business plan, setting our metrics into the future, doesn't work anymore, but we can have plans, and it's much more about course correction and, you know, do the plans still make sense? Are they still right? Rather than just absolutely head down looking at, you know, maybe the metrics and the numbers. And the other thing that I just wanted to share, because we've talked about it again quite a bit at Magic Breakfast, and it really struck me and I found it very helpful during COVID, was actually moving away from the language of resilience and robustness as organizations. And a term that was picked up, I've written it down just to make sure I get it right. Nassim Taleb wrote a book called Anti-Fragile. And it's the idea that actually by taking on and building yourself and learning through stressors. So resilience conveys that actually you withstand shocks and you stay the same. Anti-fragile is the idea that you take on shocks and stresses and you get better. So it's that learning from failure and continuing to improve and evolve through that. And I think, again, you know, recognizing we can't stay the same, we have to evolve and change. And I think, you know, in terms of, I guess, a quasi trend would be, I think, increasingly, you know, devolved power, devolved voice, to Mark's point around children, young people. You know, it's the same in charities, you know, where we still probably have at times too much hierarchy. How do we make sure that we're equipping and empowering, you know, staff to make decisions in their spaces, especially as we move to more remote working, hybrid working? And so again, I think it's the priorities and the tools that we equip ourselves and our organizations and people with need to be much more flexible and able to respond to whatever the world throws at us, because, you know, as we've all reflected on, we don't really know what 2023 is necessarily going to bring. All we can do is try and harness the best from it we possibly can for the future.
Thank you, Lindsay. Alison, your reflections, please.
Yeah, I mean, the obvious thing is that we're going into an election period, so there's nothing else for it but to think about the future and think about what we're going to be able to win, and also the possibility that there could be big change afoot where we kind of reset ourselves entirely because the playing field has changed, and because we've been here before when situations have been very different and the way you work with government becomes very different as well. I mean, the problem at the moment is the government has so many crises to deal with.
Absolutely.
The cost of living crisis is just but one. I think the danger, I think, for us is that they'll think they've done all they can on that for low-income families and moving on, lots of other things to deal with. And of course, we're nowhere near that. You know, we need loads more action on cost of living benefit increase as a bare minimum. There's so many things to do with social security reform that we need to look at to make some real difference for families. But the good news is I think that public concern is with us. We know this from British Social Attitudes and other surveys. You know, the public has been concerned for some time now that we've seen the birth of food banks and there's something wrong here. And yet, you know, politicians are standing around saying nothing to see here. Well, clearly there is something to see, and the public are very aware that there's something to see and they're not going to be told there isn't anymore. So I think we've got sort of a fair wind to be kind of thinking about getting public support for the kind of change that we need. Actually, at the beginning of the year, we had parliamentary committee agreeing cross-party that there needed to be a comprehensive child poverty strategy again. And that's definitely something that we should be trying to achieve from whichever party wins the next election. And yeah, I agree with everybody else that working on these things together is going to be where it's powerful.
So let's go back to the question of lobbying, because I think that's a really important question. And Sarah, I'll come to you because you mentioned this. What works and what doesn't work then when it comes to lobbying?
Well, look, it's really hard because I think we're sort of in that time where we're not really sure, right? So we've got a spectrum, haven't we, for charities and those who've got a civic interest. So we've got, you know, we can be, you know, inside the tent and we can be a tent pole, or we can be at the other end of the spectrum and be, you know, organisations that are kind of curating and choreographing civil action. And I think, you know, we kind of operate along this spectrum all of the time. And most of us operate in the middle ground. And I think that's been successful for many years because, but you know, we're holding our independence whilst also developing relationships with the government that allow us to have conversations we were never allowed to have before. But we're now in a time where the role of charities is being challenged. You know, I don't know that these are the exact words that an MP used to refer to us as, you know, we need to stay in our lane and be, you know, we're tea and sympathy, just do that. And, you know, keep out of politics, which I thought was incredibly patriarchal and patronising, but, you know, that's personal view. But I do think that we need to find a way of really harnessing social action and understanding of what the real issues are. And if I give you an example in mental health terms, we have done a phenomenal job in getting mental health on the agenda. There's no two ways about it. The collective work of all of the organisations, including Mind, but many others, have really brought mental health to the fore in a way that, you know, when I started it 30 years ago, I could never have imagined that we would be having the conversations we do now. But we now need to move that on from a sort of well-being narrative to actually what are the drivers that allow people to have good mental health and good physical health. And they are the social determinants of health. And people, I think, are ready to truly understand that. They're truly ready to understand that if you do not support our children and young people at school, that really attends to the contemporary needs in a contemporary world, then ultimately, you know, we're never ever going to shift the dial, right? People are absolutely desperate to have the information that will truly make the difference. And so I don't want to kind of mirror that kind of patriarchal attitude with society. I think they need to hear the truth. I think we want to hear the truth. And as Alison said, we've got a real appetite to come together and put our full weight around those issues that, you know, aren't party political. These are about children need to have, you know, good and safe lives. I mean, it literally is that simple. And there are all these levers available to us that we can utilise, but we need the public support in a way I think that we probably haven't before. So it's not just in terms of financial donations, it's their voices, it's their conversations they're having with their MP and so on and so forth. So it's this mobilisation of the public I'm interested in.
Mark, your reflections on lobbying, because obviously the Children's Society do an awful lot of lobbying. What works, what doesn't work?
Yeah, we do. And I mean, I think if you look back to the uniform change in the law, which charities don't get to change the law very often, that started with a 17-year-old whose mum went into debt with a loan shark to pay for a blazer. Thousands of our supporters got involved. Then we got, you know, private members bill. I met with Gavin Williamson, persuaded him to back it, and the rest is history. So for me, it's about I come from the starting place that actually most politicians I've ever met are they want to make the world better. It's not true for all, but most, right? So that's my starting place. And the Children's Society has, if you like, two well springs of wisdom that we bring into the room when we do these things. One is that we're not just, you know, talking about stuff, we do the stuff. We're working with thousands and thousands of children, and that learning helps us develop what the policy approaches are that we're suggesting to ministers and to politicians needs to change. So it's going into the room with evidence-based solutions, earthed in practice and earthed in the understanding of real people's lives. And then it's about relationship building. It's about building trust with people, and that takes time. And the longer you do it, the more you get those relationships of trust that you can pick up the phone and ring a minister or ring an MP and talk to them about the issues that you're concerned about. So it's about building the movement, mobilizing people. It's about having the right evidence. It's about speaking to what you know about. And it's about hoping that you are able to build the relationships that affect the kind of change you want to see.
So you've all talked about collaboration, haven't you? And I'd love to know, hear just a couple of voices on whether you think that's going to translate to more mergers happening in the sector. Alison, what's your view on this?
Jolly. I don't honestly know. I think, to be honest, I think one of the things that's going to make that inevitable is that there are some charities really struggling.
Yeah.
And so there are going to be, and this is not always the best way to merge, is it? There's sort of crashing charities crash into each other and try and hold each other up. It's not ideal, but there will inevitably be quite a lot of that happening. I think if we see some real political change, I think there'll be an even bigger spur for that sort of thing to happen. You know, because lots more people and more charities have moved into this space, certainly around, you know, child and family poverty, because it's such a crisis, you know, because the issues are huge and the need is huge. Well, you know, if things improve, that might not be so much the case. So things could change for all kinds of reasons. And there might be good strategic reasons for charities to get together. I mean, my worry has always been that you very often got charities that are very financially weak trying to join together, and then you end up with one very big, very unstable charity, which is kind of not great. So I think you'd have to really think through what the good reasons might be for charities joining up together. Some, you know, I hate to say it, but I mean, we've all talked about, you know, what's happened in terms of food banks, and, you know, I'm sure food bank leaders would be the first to say they want to do themselves out of business, you know. So, you know, I mean, that's terribly optimistic, isn't it? At some point in the future, it would be nice to see the end of what's basically parish relief because the government hasn't stepped up.
So we're coming to the end. Oh yeah, go for it, Lindsay.
I would love to jump in on the merger point, because it's an area of particular interest for me, having been involved in one and having attempted a couple where it's funders who need to change in this space for charities to be able to meaningfully and with genuine impact come together, because it costs money to merge and to be more effective. And, you know, to Alison's point, bringing failing organizations together is not valuable. A lot of funding actually takes money out of the sector when you merge charities. And, you know, that's been found in a lot of research. So I think funders need to take a leadership role in this space and enable the conversations, the mature, low ego conversations of mergers, closures, and, you know, that radical reform ultimately.
So we're almost at the end. Unbelievably, it's been such a fantastic conversation. I would love just to hear a key takeout that you would like our audience to take away, a message of hope perhaps for 2023. Sarah, I'm going to come to you.
I think there is hope, but it does demand a considerable amount of effort. And so whilst we need to be resilient ourselves as individuals and organisations, we ultimately need the environment in which we exist to be resilient. And so we can't just focus on the individual, we need to focus on the wider system for that to be realised. But we can do it. We've done it before and we will do it again.
Absolutely. Alison, take out from you.
Similar thought in a way. I think we just need to keep going and to be ambitious. if, you know, for example, in the past, we know what has caused child poverty to rise, for example, and we know what solutions worked before. When we had a child poverty strategy in government, child poverty came down. So the good news for the UK is we know what to do because we've done it before, so we can do it again. And the public are with us and they want to see that change. So I think we should be optimistic that change will happen.
Fantastic. Lindsay.
I think this conversation just gives a highlight, doesn't it, to how aligned we all are. Think about the collective shared purpose and sense of direction of, you know, these organizations, the people who have been submitting questions and points in the chat. So there's a huge amount of power and opportunity in that. And I also think one of the questions around how do we make sure about kind of burnout and, you know, ultimately making sure that we're each individually accountable. And I think, you know, for us as leaders to role model taking holidays, you know, recognizing that we're tired at times too, and taking a step back and not pushing relentlessly on without, you know, kind of really considering the impact on people. So I guess it's almost connecting the big and the little. I have hope in the fact that small actions make a big difference over a sustained period of time. So
Indeed. And Mark.
25 years ago, I was a youth worker on the streets of a town called Lurgan in Northern Ireland in the height of the first year of the ceasefire. And that year, 25 years ago this year, was the Good Friday Agreement. And I was part of a process bringing young people into that room to have their voices heard, to fight for change. 25 years later, we take peace in Northern Ireland for granted. As a child growing up in war-torn Northern Ireland, I didn't think that was possible, but it was, because people came together, people worked for change, people lobbied for change, people believed in change, and we've had 25 years of peace in Northern Ireland. I believe with all my heart we can see change in this country. And I believe, as I believed then, 25 years ago, as I believe now, change can happen through the voices of children and young people, together fighting for a better world. So I have seen social change happen where I grew up, and I'm very hopeful we can see it again. And I am proud to work with this extremely talented bunch of people on the screen, and all of you watching. Together, we will build a better, fairer, safer world for our children.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we've come to the end, but what a fantastic way to end. Thank you so much for attending. I hope that was interesting and inspiring. A very special thank you to our panelists, to Sarah, to Alison, to Lindsay, and to Mark for joining us and for sharing such wisdom. Do watch out for the next Change Conversation, probably going to be in the spring, but we'll be marketing it. And do look after yourselves and have a fantastic 2023. God bless you all. Thank you. See you.